Good evening and a very warm welcome to all our viewers. My name is Samantha Castle and I'm the Senior Manager for Alumni Relations at the University of Pretoria. Tonight, we are proud to present another special edition of the LeadUP Alumni Virtual Chats. As we celebrate Heritage Month, tonight's discussion is titled LeadUP Harnessing Heritage. This evening, Professor Vasu Reddy, who is our Dean of the Faculty of Humanities at UP, will moderate a thought-provoking discussion on preserving heritage and embracing diversity. Prof. Reddy will be joined by UP experts in culture and heritage, and also the renowned sculptor and poet, Professor Pitika Ntuli. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for your ongoing support. We really do appreciate it. Now, without any further ado, allow me to introduce to you our Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Tawana Kupe, to say a few words of welcome to you. Over to you, Prof. Kupe.
A very warm welcome to everyone. Today is a little bit cold, although we are now in spring, but our events are always warm. UP is a warm place. I also want to welcome our wonderful panel. They'll be introduced by our esteemed Dean, Professor Vasu Reddy, so I won't say much about that. This is an important month in South Africa, important month on our continent, and I would say the world. Heritage, culture, history are important to a people's identity. A people cannot achieve sustainable development without culture, history, identity, and identities being part of the drivers for change, the drivers for recreating a new society and reimagining a society. At UP, going forward, we are in the period of rethinking and reimagining the University of Pretoria and the contributions it will make to creating a new society that is prosperous, just, equitable, in which all cultures and our diversity is a wellspring, if you like, of prosperity, better life, and well-being. You will know and you will remember that last year we launched the Javet UP Art Center, a veritable institution that speaks to history, culture, art, performance, and everything. We had to close it down, like all institutions were closed by COVID-19. But here's the good news. On the 24th of September this year, 2020, 24th September 2020, on Heritage Day, we are reopening it, we are relaunching it, if you like, a rebirth, if you like, as we reimagine a different and a better future. So please come on, come all. We will be very delighted to see all of you. And the rest of it, the university is doing very well at many levels. Many of our subjects, areas, our faculties are doing very well across many broad measures, and in some we're the leading institution. Finally, let me say this. Culture, heritage, history is a lifelong place at the University of Pretoria. Why? Because as part of our reimagining the university, we're no longer thinking only of isolated siloed disciplines, history, economics, engineering, and all of those. We're thinking of co-creating forms of knowledge that tap into all disciplines, including the diversity of disciplines, but seek to create new forms of knowledge, representation, understanding, imaging that will speak to the wellspring of us as South Africans and as Africans and as citizens of the world. I'd like to end by thanking also the Alumni Office and the Senior Manager Alumni Relations, Samantha Castle, for mounting what is now become very famous LeadUP alumni series that other universities admire so much. I'm quite sure there are a number of people from other universities, I will not mention one in particular, that have joined us. You are all welcome. All of us are UP. There is strength and unity in diversity. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Prof. Kupe, for that kind words. And also, we're excited for the reopening of our Javet Art Center on Heritage Day. So please, if you have time and you feel free to visit our Javet Art Center. We look forward to your comments and also your questions in slido.com. So please stay tuned for the discussion this evening. Happy Heritage Month, and we hope you enjoy your Heritage Day with us. Over to you, Prof. Reddy.
Thank you, Samantha, and good evening to our alumni all across the world as we connect with you virtually. And thanks to the Vice Chancellor, Professor Cooper, for saying those few important critical words. And he's been a champion of the alumni, and since arrival, we have seen a great visibility at our university with regard to media engagement with people beyond the university, both within and outside, and certainly our alumni are critical. As Samantha has explained, I'm Vasu Reddy, the Dean of the Faculty. I'm a Professor of Sociology at this university. So welcome again to LeadUP, Harnessing Heritage. It's our alumni virtual chat. And we're all excited about this real topical issue with the tagline, how can we leverage the power of diversity? And tonight, as Samantha has indicated, I'll be chatting to a diverse panel of experts and certainly also alumni at the University of Pretoria. They will reflect on heritage, what it means and how it can be preserved. They will also be suggesting ways in which the power of diversity can be leveraged in our society. So in this session, you will have some insight into the importance of preserving culture and heritage. We hope that you will also have a better understanding of the value of heritage in our society. You will also, I gather, appreciate and recognize cultural diversity, both locally and globally. And more importantly, you will learn more about the role that the UP's Faculty of Humanities, our UP museums, and our UP archives play in preserving heritage. Of course, as you all know, this event is brought to you by the University of Pretoria, and most of the panelists who will be joining us are academics. But let me introduce you to our esteemed panel. Firstly, Professor Pitika Ntuli, who is a well-known sculptor, poet, writer, and academic. Second, Dr. Sian Tiley-Nel, who is the head of the University of Pretoria Museums and the curator of the Mapungubwe collection and archive. Third, Professor Karen Harris, who is our active head of the Department of Historical and Heritage Studies at the University of Pretoria, as well as the director of the UP Archives. And last but not least, Reverend Charlotte Sibanyoni, who is a Hebrew lecturer at UP, yes, a Hebrew lecturer at University of Pretoria, and a reverend in the Dutch Reformed Church. She makes also history at the University of Pretoria as being the first Hebrew lecturer of color in the faculty and at the university. So something for all of us to be proud of. But before we get going with our discussion, I'd like to just alert you about how slido.com works and to indicate that you can use certainly the hashtag LeadUP 22nd September. You can post your questions here to participate. We have 3 questions that will be running as a poll during this conversation. And of course, you can vote on the platform as well. And we will share some of the results at the end of our broadcast. Our first poll this evening, the first poll question, is quite an important one. And we would like you to actively participate and respond. And it's titled, would you like to be notified about more UP alumni events in the future? Very simple answers. Yes, I would. And no, I would not. So with that, welcome again. And let me start with our panel to turn to our conversation. As Samantha has indicated, this is a conversation about harnessing heritage. Of course, you all know, wherever you're located, we are in the midst of Heritage Month in South Africa. Thursday, 24th of September is Heritage Day, a holiday that started off as an idea that embodies our unity and diversity, but now it's also much about culture. As some might say, Valentine's Day is about love. But of course, Heritage Day is important because we as South Africans are encouraged to celebrate culture, diversity, beliefs, traditions in the wider context of a nation that belongs to all its people. For many people, it's a day we are encouraged to show up in traditional attire. For others, it's simply a day to have a braai with family and friends. For many, it is about performing our pride. As many of you might also know, our president recently requested that we mark the day by joining in hashtag Jerusalema, that important challenge, a song that has turned into a global dance hit, has it got South Africans and the global world dancing. Of course, we are a nation of singers and dancers as well. So the question is, what does this all mean to us? What does it tell us about our understanding of heritage? So let's get on with the chat and the conversation to better understand these issues. And perhaps who better to start with than with Professor Pitika Ntuli, quite an icon, not just simply academically, but in the cultural scene in our country. Prof. Ntuli, I think we should start with you by posing this important question. What can you tell us is your understanding of this creature called heritage?
I think when you talk about heritage, you talk about all the tangible and intangible issues that we have: science, technology, culture, who we are, where we have been, what we have done, and what we have actually even failed, to do. And therefore, I believe that heritage is to us a very guide, a laboratory, for our own ideas of how to live, our lives, in order to help us again at the same time that we don't repeat the mistakes that other people have already committed. So in the context of South Africa, we are a diverse people, but we are joined by one issue: our geography. Our politics separated us, but our independence is pushing us so that we can all be one nation across color, race, or any belief systems that we are. So I believe that this conversation is going to take us a bit further, so that at the end we have got practical suggestions as to how to harness this diversity, especially right now when we speak about the issues of colonial statues. It brings in a lot of emotions, passionate emotions. People say destroy, these. These are apartheid relics. These are colonial relics that got no place around here. And there are those who are saying, no, 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 no. Let's take these and put them up into a safe place so they become teaching aids for our history, for our philosophy, and for our culture. So in other words, then, we have got to decide as to whether are we going to react basically from our political perspectives, or from our creative perspectives, to know that those monuments themselves were created by people who are artists. So we are not iconoclasts that we want to destroy works of art, but to preserve them so that our heritage should be visualized the best that they could be. Maybe that would then bring us closer together across color, race, religion, sex, or belief.
Well, thank you, Prof, for those opening set of ideas. I think what's important to what you're saying is that you attach a value and importance to this issue of heritage. Dr. Sian Tiley-Nel, why would you think heritage is important from where you are located and the kind of work that you do?
Thank you, Professor Reddy. My concept and understanding of heritage has changed dramatically over the past 20 years. The meaning of heritage changes all the time. It's different today as it was 20 years ago. It is a very difficult concept. I somehow see it as a more fluid and not concretized into a single definition. I see history I see heritage, it's not history, it's not culture. It's a conglomeration of heritages that have significance in our presence that relate to the past. Obviously, from a more formal point of view, from a university museum point of view, heritage is defined as that which is either cultural or natural. But I think the more important part are those unofficial heritages. I know heritages is a terrible English word, but there's no other way to describe it. A more bottom-up approach where heritage is more about landscape, memory, people, objects, identity. And I think a university museum is there to promote heritage, share the heritage, store the heritage. And as Professor Ntuli said, it can be both tangible or intangible. So I don't have a particular definition. I know in academia, with whichever discipline you follow, there are different ways of defining heritage. I see heritage as a vast tapestry of linkages and synergies. Exactly that what it is creativity. And I think it's something that we inherit from the past, but heritage is something that we can hand to future generations. I think people mistake heritage as being something particularly cultural. Within the university, we don't just curate cultural heritage. It's technological heritage, it's archaeological heritage, it's historical heritage, it's natural heritage. I mean, the long list of types of heritage is very, very important. And people should see that beyond heritage, that beyond culture, there are many different forms of heritage, and that's what we need to promote.
Just tell us briefly, because I mean, sometimes we academics tend to use words that many of our colleagues out there may not necessarily get. And I don't want to sort of, misrepresent that. But maybe very briefly, because Prof. Ntuli also used this, what do we mean very simply with tangible versus intangible? Give us some examples.
So tangible would be those objects, places, things that are movable, that you can physically see and touch. So perhaps 20 years ago, they were only looking at those items that you see in front of you, but it was completely neglecting all those other intangible things: sound, music, language. So for example, as the curator of the Mapungubwe collection, yes, those artifacts are tangible, the landscape is tangible, but what about all the touches and the traditions and the oral history that is associated with it? We don't know what they did 1,000 years ago in terms of music, language, and those are the intangible aspects that need to come to the fore, and they are often marginalized in history because you cannot actually pinpoint them exactly. So once again, tangible and intangible, but I think it's more a holistic sum of all those inherited traditions, whether they're physically there or not.
Thank you very much. Reverend Sibanyoni, perhaps if you could just give us, your take on this. I mean, what is this creature called heritage in your location, your study, your sense of the word, and why is it important to you?
Thank you, Prof. For me, heritage is a celebration of cultural inheritance, and for me, our heritage holds stories, and legacies of those who left it, those who've gone before us. And for me, we can't celebrate heritage without remembering, our king, King Shaka, and the Zulu nation, and not just remembering it, but celebrating it. And it forms part of my identity, and for example, even in that history, for me, the woman that played a role during that, bringing different diverse clans together in their diverse cultures. We look at Makavai, which we don't talk about, who was the aunt of Shaka, who also played an instrumental role for bringing these clans together. And so women like that are the reason I celebrate heritage. For me, that is heritage. And for me as a young Black woman and Ndebele woman, for me, heritage is also the celebration of women like Dr. Esther Mahlangu, you know, the artist. So when I think heritage, I think of our history. I think of this identity they taught me to carry. I think of the legacy they left, and they, well, not left because Dr. Esther Mahlangu is still painting, but the legacy that they bring forth, and I also want to be part of it, and I want and I wanted to move forward with that. So that's what heritage is for me. It's a celebration of this beautiful history.
Yes, indeed, a celebration. Well, maybe turning to Professor Karen Harris. I mean, you are, I think, one of the leading professors of historical and heritage studies. Certainly not many universities have that as a focus. I mean, you lead that. Could you share, I mean, given your sort of experience, your teaching, your research, your location in this sector, I mean, what's your sense of that creature called heritage? And why is it important to you? And how do you kind of, you know, sell this idea, market the idea, problematize it for students in some ways?
Thank you very much, Prof. Reddy. I think it's vitally important, and a number of the panel have already touched on issues, but heritage it must be inclusive, but it's also a very individual package. When we talk about what is this creature, each individual has a different perspective on what that is. And I think when we start out with our heritage and cultural studies at the university, one of the first things I do is I ask my students, I've got this cabinet, this make-believe cabinet, put something from your heritage in there. And it's as diverse as the students sitting in front of me, but immediately it starts unlocking an understanding between them. And I think Prof. Ntuli made a very important point as well. It's warts and all. When we talk about the heritage of statues, where some people have got problems with these statues, you cannot remove things from history. You need to understand them, you need to interpret them, and you need to then come to grips with them. So I think that's very critically important. But heritage as such is as I say, it's very loaded. And if you take it at its very base meaning, it's something that's passed down. So it's got to do with where you come from, what makes you you, and what makes you different from somebody else. But the richness of the heritage, moving then from looking at it from a historical perspective, but then going and looking at the tourism domain, which we also, as you rightly said, teach at the university, it is that diversity which makes South Africa a selling point. Because we have such a range, and we need to embrace this range and not become one sort of boiling pot as there is across the Atlantic Ocean. We are diverse. We need to have that difference. And that is what will strengthen our country. But it's a tolerance of this diversity and a respect and regard for the different heritages that do exist. And I think it is mandatory on all of those in the curatorial divisions to actually embrace this going forward.
Yeah, no, perhaps maybe just to build on what you're saying. I mean, you obviously, your location is in the higher education sector, but you have a deep connection to archives and broader questions around heritage. I mean, you know, obviously you can speak from the perspective of the University of Pretoria and what you're doing with your students, etc. But I mean, what's your sense about how important this is within the broader higher education landscape around, you know, the questions around the diversity of backgrounds, the question of promotion of heritage and culture, both at a practical, at a symbolic, but also at an intellectual level? And what more can we do in order to embrace this diversity?
We from the get-go with our student body in higher education make them aware of this diversity. When we look at where our students come from across the country, many of them have never been exposed to other cultures and have come from a particular neck in the woods. And just being exposed to that at the institution, sitting in the same benches, and in fact it goes almost back to Jan Smuts when he started out the institution. His ideal was to bring at that stage the warring races of the Boer and the Brit together in one institution. And I think if we look at where the universities come over 100 years later, that diversity is really exemplary in the institution. And it is those doors that open up and windows that open up. But if one even takes us down to the secondary level and even primary level, I think it would be an exceedingly good idea that students at school level are exposed to heritage and instead of life orientation, more on the heritage dimension of our societies, that they can embrace that and understand other cultures, because it only enriches them. So that is very, very important. Another point you mentioned, Prof. Reddy, and maybe just to touch on that, is also about how do we look after this heritage? And archives and the like were really top down. They were government institutions. And now our archives are opening up and being far more inclusive of a lot more. Those silent voices that Dr. Sian Tiley-Nel referred to, those on the fringes, that we bring these people in, their stories, music. One of my students did a PhD on embroidery cloths of women up in the Northern Province. That is part of their heritage, and it tells a story. And so it's got to be inclusive to enrich, the ultimate heritage that we possess.
No, thank you. I mean, I think what a number of you are saying really speaks to this idea of something to do with a kind of celebration, recognition, the presence, acknowledgement of this creature also that we are striving towards, this understanding of a shared culture. Reverend Sibanyoni, if I could turn to you, I mean, is there a need for a country as diverse as ours to have this sense of a shared culture? And I mean, if you, depending on what your perspectives are, what should we be doing to encourage building of such a shared culture?
Definitely. Thank you, Prof. I think so, because as we said or touched upon, is that we need to acknowledge our different cultures and different ethnic groups, and not just that. I think in high institutions, for example, I think it's good when students study and become scholars and write about this heritage, about these different cultures, so that we have different voices. The more we get young people involved in participating, in living it out, in bringing forth their talents, and also being scholars and voicing it out in different ways, and not just in art, in what they write, in what they produce in their different fields. I think that's where we are going and moving towards. And I think that's the way we should carry on. Am I answering, Prof?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think there are no easy answers to this question. Maybe if I could, just extend it further with Prof. Ntuli. I mean, you have written extensively. I mean, you're a creative, you're a thinker, you're a scholar, you're an artist of note. I mean, these things I think I know, knowing your work very well, have preoccupied you for a number of decades now. I mean, do you think South Africans are already developing or agreeing on this idea of a shared culture? I mean, I don't know what your responses are, but I mean, if you could give us some examples that you know of around this shared culture.
What happened is that sometimes when I come home here, I come into a very rainbow nation. My children come up with people whose identities I don't know, whose nationalities I just do not know, and they seem to be living, their lives, very, easy. So one of the main things for me that irks me more than anything else, the absence of an intergenerational conversation, in South Africa. Students don't seem to be talking much to their lecturers. Even when they go up on strike, we are not going to find anybody. They'll get an old octogenarian like myself to come there in fees must fall to protect them and protect the university at the same time. When we say, where are your favorite lecturers? They said they don't understand us. So the basic thing for us to come with these things is right up at the universities. It's a question of what kind of a curriculum are we going to develop to move away from the whole Oxbridge, model of doing things. We must also be honest enough and tell ourselves that we missed a golden opportunity when we merged our universities. When we merged our universities, we had a golden opportunity that very few countries had, in the world, to construct something that is us. Look at South Africa. You go over to Durban. you find that there's a whole what you could call an Indian community in there, with all of the knowledge that they have. You've got the colored people, you've got now biracial people, you've got a variety of people. How much can we, in a sense, pick up from each of these kind of cultures and construct ourselves and to reimagine ourselves? I'm saying this very practically, because from the age of 16, I was forced to read the Upanishads, the Vedanta, because my uncle was a friend to Padayaji, in it. So, and also having lived in exile, meeting all the different kind of cultures, you come back home with that view in your mind that if it happens in the UK, it can happen in Germany, that people could be different colors, speak with different actually accents, but all of them focused and committed to their particular country, to the particular nation that they actually belong to. That then is what we need to do, that intergenerational conversation, that issue of promoting more and more of our monuments, because our monuments are there for the construction of the identity, in preparing for the history that is yet to come, in representing the history that had actually come before. So as South Africans, we have got Jerusalem. One song is bringing everybody close together. Even Laurel and Hardy are dancing to Jerusalem. I love that. I'll only stop loving it when I see Trump doing it. But it's possible, for South African creativity is very powerful. That is a heritage that we have that must help carry us forward.
Indeed, Prof. I mean, it's our rhythm, it's our ability to make music, even if there's great difficulty. And I mean, it's sort of straddling the world, taking it by storm. In fact, I think it might even overtake, if we could say, that other very famous Korean artist, the Gangnam Style, I think it will be fantastic. Before we go, we're reaching the midpoint of our broadcast, and I would like to just, recognizing the wonderful comments and questions are coming through by participants and alumni. And perhaps very briefly before we go to the second poll question, Dr. Sian Tiley-Nel, I just have a question that's come up for you, and if you could give a sort of a succinct, brief response before we go to the second poll. And the question is, how is UP engaging, I mean, just building on what Prof. Ntuli is saying, the community in the curation of heritage, which I think is quite critical as well in terms of what we do?
Yes, thank you. That's a very, very good question. Well, first of all, the fact that these collections and heritage resources are in a museum that they're on display, people can come see them free of charge, is a starting point. And that these different heritage collections are not mothballed in storage or hidden away. Sometimes the heritage is not too easily to be celebrated but remembered, because not all heritage is deemed good at that time, obviously. UP engages a lot with the community from a museum perspective. We have learners from all ages. So just what Professor was saying about this intergenerational gap is that the university museums have lots of school learners that come through. And even now, during COVID, we're able to take and have those discussions about heritage online and provide educational tours. And also on a much deeper level, the university has signed agreements with sandparks, and we are in conversation with sandparks and traditional communities. So when people say community engagement, that could be the research community, it could be the traditional communities up in and around the landscape of Mapungubwe. And of course, I also see learners as the community. But without curating those objects within a museum, I think we are much poorer, because if they weren't in a museum, where would they be? They would be in storage or in someone's private home, where you would not be able to share it with anybody. And that's what museums are. They're the social spaces. They are the network that the university can elevate to promote to different communities.
No, thank you, Dr. Tiley-Nel there. I think this is an opportune moment for us to run the second poll, and it kind of ties in beautifully with the kind of question that we have, and that might come up on your screen in a second or so. And we invite our audience to respond to that. The poll 2 question reads, do you think it is important for people to make a concerted effort to preserve their culture and heritage? Obviously, very easy answers. Yes, it is, or no, it is not. And obviously, we'll provide you with some responses with what people feel with regard to those questions before we end. We're almost 23 minutes into completing the session, this broadcast. So I would then like to turn to the second component of our discussions with this great panel. And perhaps maybe if I could revert to Reverend Sibanyoni. I mean, forgive me for zeroing in on you. You're a young person, and I don't mean to be, picking on you, because I think we're all young, frankly. But maybe we could ask you. I mean, we have quite a diverse audience of alumni out there. I mean, when we talk about heritage, we tend to sort of ignore, and I think Prof. Ntuli and several other colleagues have been talking about this. Would you say the majority of young people today have a sense of culture and heritage? You're somebody who might have your pulse on those kind of issues. What would you say?
Thank you, Prof. I think young people do have a sense of culture and heritage, and I say that because yes, because I'm a young person, I think we do have a sense of culture. We love our different culture. We love our different cultures with what we have, and I think young people do the best with what they have, because heritage and culture is not just food and entertainment, and it is part of it, the food and the entertainment and the dance and that, but it's also part of our identity. And I see a lot of young people from different cultures living out the different cultures in the same space, allowing each other to be diverse. But what I also want to add to this is I see a lot of young people also who are becoming fashion designers, creating beautiful cultural clothing. Even our cakes and our weddings, our parties become part of who we are. We are going back to our cultural norm that we know and that we are taught. But also, like I said, it's not just that. I'm a young person who wants young people to go further than that and become scholars, so that those voices can be heard globally, so that what they are doing can also be seen globally, can be acknowledged globally. I think young people have a lot, like Prof. Ntuli said, young people have a lot to share, but instead we ask somebody older to come and share with us. Well, we have so much to bring to the table. So my encouragement to young people is to write, so that we hear these different voices, so that we bring these different voices to the table. So, but we do have a sense of culture within us as young people. I just think we can go even bigger.
Yeah, thank you for that. Maybe if I could pick up on an aspect that came up, just before we went to poll 2 question, and there's some fascinating questions popping up here from our audience of esteemed alumni. And one of the questions comes through, which I think is also quite important, speaking about the shared histories issue. This particular audience member or alumni poses the question as follows, and I would like Prof. Harris, if you could start, and then I give Prof. Ntuli an opportunity to also respond, because I know he's got a great stake in these particular important issues. The question goes like this: has the government failed in ensuring that the multiple or parallel histories of our country receive equal representation in monuments, statues, etc.? Prof. Harris?
Thank you, Prof. Reddy. A very loaded question. And I thought before you got to the statues, we were just trying to talk about history per se. How has history been used? History is a dangerous discipline when it's in the wrong hands. And then that applies again to who's commemorating what. So when we looked at the history of the apartheid years, parts of the history were obliterated. The most part of the history was obliterated. And it was this history which was to present a particular narrative and justify a government in doing what it was doing. And we see this the world over in various dictatorships and so on, where history is actually almost harassed to get to a point where it means something completely different. And the same when you have these iconic celebrations of a particular person, that person might not have been and have the same meaning to somebody else. Now, I like what Prof. Ntuli said about what do we do? Do we get rid of all of this? No, you cannot run away from it. This is something that happened and we need to deal with it and put it in the right perspective. But there's a difference between celebrating a past and commemorating a past and critically looking at that past. And I think that is so key to the whole issue of how we deal with it. Different governments will celebrate different things, and different members of our very diverse community will want different icons to be given place in history and in these monumental sort of places. But we need to try and be as inclusive as possible. Across the world, we see how heroes become zero heroes overnight. Somebody as iconic as Gandhi has shifted. There's a new take on Gandhi, just to give an example of something outside of our domain. And so it's very important that we try to see these things and be critical. And that is why history is so important. Every single citizen should have an understanding of history because it gives you that depth and perspective of what has happened.
Yeah, if I could build with Prof. Ntuli, I mean, there's another fascinating question here which speaks to history. It speaks to the effects of our colonial past. Prof. Ntuli, I mean, you did allude to this somewhat, I think, in some of your opening statements, but here's a question for you coming from an alumni. How do we deal with the idea of tribes, which are a construct of the colonial effect? Is there any utility in upholding those somewhat divisive categories in the present? I mean, I guess it probably might speak to issues of heritage, but it's quite an important issue, it seems, raised by one of the alumni. Yeah, Prof. Ntuli?
I think the fact that in 1912 we had the South African Native Congress, which became an African National Congress, not a tribal, because we're fighting for national liberation. But one thing that the heritage that I think we need to discard first and foremost is to look at history simply in terms of black and white. The apartheid regime was a regime perpetuated by white people, but it was a commercial system. Lots of people across the country, the Ruth First died fighting for it. The Joe Slovos, died for it. Bezos, who just died, right now. My cousin who betrayed me when I was hiding in his mother's place is on the other side. We must also come up to see how the role of creativity is very, very important. The Cecil Scottnesses, the Ray Bermans, when apartheid was right at its height, the artists would go to the backyards of some white suburb there and go and paint, because as artists, color was just one of those things that needed to be looked at. So we have got all the material upon which we can actually recreate ourselves, if at all we were to try to get in the Union Building. The statue of Mandela had a rabbit in the ear, and they were forced to take that rabbit out. In my Mandela, who is 20 tons of granite, weighing 4.3 million, we took that a rabbit out of the ear and put it onto the shoulder so that the children can be able to, to see it. So no one says that when we are reconstructing a nation and building a nation and celebrating your heritage, you should not be able to be angry, to be happy, to be creative, and to not to take yourself too seriously.
No, indeed, absolutely. Dr. Tiley-Nel, I mean, there's somewhat of a philosophical question by one of the alumni here, which I think might be useful for you to think about. I mean, the question or the comment, it starts off with a question and it goes into, starts off as a comment rather than going into a question, and says, heritage is about different nuclei. My heritage, our heritage, everyone's heritage. How do we help these different clusters find common ground? I mean, that's a big question, eh?
Yes, I agree. There's no particularly easy question to that. Just like we celebrate common ground, we should also celebrate the differences. Museums can't cover all subject matters in that way. Sometimes at the university museums, we've inherited collections that go back 100 to 110 years. We have colonial collections, apartheid collections, contemporary collections, and how does one bring all of those together and make it as inclusive as possible is perhaps one of the most difficult curatorial tasks, because you are not able to please everybody. The best that you can do is show what you've got and provide context for it. I think what Professor Harris said is very important. People need to understand a bit of that history, a bit of the context. And I can't say whether it's young people or old people, because within the museum experience, I see the youth, and I'm talking about really young people, age 11 and 12, who are studying heritage in social sciences. They have a far better concept or grasp of what heritage is, even a worldview of heritage, than someone who is, say, in their 60s or 70s. I think the youth, and that is why I find a museum a very exciting place, because it's completely intergenerational. As Professor Harris says, it depends on where that individual comes from. And even when I'm presenting something in the museum, I grew up in apartheid. My sense of heritage and history is so remarkably different from somebody else. And I just want to actually just slot that in tonight, because it's just something personal. My daughter is 12, and every year during Heritage Day, she is in a state of, what must I wear? We come from a very mixed family, English and Irish heritage. I married someone who's Afrikaans, and her biggest dilemma every year is, what should I wear? We don't have any particular item of clothing to say, this is what I am and this is what this is what I represent. And for the first time in 12 years, tomorrow, in fact, she's wearing something plain. She's going as herself. And it's taken her 12 years to realize, this is my history, this is my heritage that we've been passed on, but it's me. I don't have to put on a necklace. I don't have to wear anything particular to show this is my heritage. According to her, her heritage is me coming to school, and this is what I am. And that's what I find so exciting. I find the youth, and I'm not talking about people who are in their 20s, I'm really talking about young children, and asking them, what does heritage mean to you? Why do you visit museums? And you'll be surprised. Of the, let's say, 40,000 visitors that come through our museum, a lot of them are alumni and very good supporters, but the most interesting questions come from the youngest generation. And they make you think, and they make you talk and debate about what is heritage and what is history. And so Professor Ntuli is coming from a completely different perspective about his experience on history, as Professor Harris would, as I would. And once again, it all goes back to your own experiences.
Important. Reverend Sibanyoni, I think this question was kind of designed for you. I mean, you'll get the drift. You'll get the drift as I ask the question. It comes from one of the alumni. It says, what is the future of heritage as more cross marriages are witnessed in the country? My origin, the person says, is part of my heritage. I mean, you might be seeing that in your church or in your, what you do in terms of the job. What's your thoughts there?
Wow. Okay. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, alumni. I think it's beautiful, and I think it will give us a platform to celebrate both the couple's heritage. For example, if I get married with someone from a different ethnic group, I would want to celebrate both the Sindebele culture and also celebrate their culture, you know, so making space for both these cultures to be alive, you know, teaching the kids as well to live both these cultures. And also in ministry as a reverend, you also see that we're moving to a space where church is celebrated in different ways, accommodating different cultures and different people from different backgrounds. And I think that is definitely the space we're supposed to be moving in. And I think a mixed marriage will give an equal opportunity to both those cultures to be celebrated equally, and to also acknowledge and respect and take forward both those cultures. That's how I would see it.
No, great. Oh, well, let me just turn to you, Prof. Harris. And this is a question by one of the posed, from one of the alumni. And it goes like this, could interdisciplinary subjects, I'm sure you have the answer, such as heritage and cultural tourism, be the key to preserving, conserving, and protecting South Africa's rich heritage?
Thanks, Prof. Reddy, and thanks to the alumni who asked that question. I think it's critical, and I think that is one of the reasons why we in the Department of Historical and Heritage Studies are so keen on taking this discipline forward. It is a new field of study, and some even refer to it as an in-discipline and not a discipline on its own. But it does draw together so many strings, and we found it growing by leaps and bounds over the last decade in the department. And it definitely is a situation whereby students are made aware of each other from the get-go, whether we're focusing on festivals, whether we're focusing on the ways tours are put together in the tourism sector and so on. So it's critical, and it is very interdisciplinary, and that's why it's called an in-discipline, because it takes so much from all the other disciplines. But when you sit with a class of 200, 300 first-year students, and suddenly you see their eyes going open as they start appreciating where they're coming from, not only geographically, but culturally, generationally, what they've experienced, and actually bringing that together, and to see that this is actually a product in its diversity that can be put to such good use in the country in terms of the tourism industry, but also, more importantly for me, in terms of relations between people, and having that respect and appreciation for something that is not your own. And I think that was one of the evil things of apartheid, was to divide people and keep them apart so they could not understand and embrace and have appreciation for each other. And so I think that is absolutely critical.
Well, I mean, we can go on with this conversation. I mean, you'll be, surprised to see that we have virtually 5 minutes left. So my role as a moderator is to bring the conversation to a close, but certainly not an end, because it can continue in our platform, certainly beyond the confines of this virtual space. And that's what's so powerful of the media we use. But maybe a final question before I'm going to ask every panelist to think about a wrap-up comment in about 30 seconds, 45 seconds each. But Prof. Ntuli, just this question to you. I mean, I know you've been interested in this as well. What role do heritage sites play in educating and making us conscious of our heritage? Prof? You're on silent, I think. Oh, yes, go ahead. Now we hear you.
Sorry?
Go ahead, Prof.
Oh. Can you hear me?
Great, go ahead.
Yes. Oh,
yes,
I've lost my train of thought.
Sites, for example, play in educating and making us conscious of our heritage.
I mean, when you look around us, heritage sites are the ones that kept us oppressed. They are the ones that built the nation that oppressed us. Monuments and those sites are created for a specific purpose of bringing a particular people together, have a joint approach to life. That's why nation building and the issues of diversity means that when we build in South Africa, when we say we have got a program for social cohesion, but I've never seen a social cohesion where there were black and white people or Indian and colored. It's social cohesion, black people talking to black people. In other words, we are not actually thinking right. And let me just very quickly say, the major program that put us here was Newtonian physics, a physics of binaries, good, bad, black, white. Now we operate on quantum mechanics, connectivity, the interrelationship, interdependence, and the interconnectedness of everything, which is the basis upon which the principle of Ubuntu is done. Is the basic thing that the Swamis and the people in India and in Peru are telling you, that the wheel has come full circle. In a quantum age, then it's possible for us to connect with each other and build a meaningful nation.
No, thank you. Colleagues, that I'm going to give you all, frankly, about 20 seconds. I mean, I know this is a tall order. I'm not asking you to summarize anything. This is a conversation that will continue beyond the platform. We've covered a range of issues, and I think our alumni found it quite fascinating. It's certainly a beginning and never an end. Let me start with you, Dr. Tiley-Nel. Just a wrap-up, close-up comment, Dr. Tiley-Nel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think this very LeadUP initiative on heritage shouldn't just be relegated to Heritage Month. It's something that we should be talking about every month. Within a university museum environment, we deal with heritage daily. It should not just be to commemorate those particular events, and we should get into the habit of talking about heritage on a daily basis. But a university museum provides the social and cultural work for a university. I can definitely say that the University of Pretoria has invested interests in heritage. We're the only university with a heritage committee. And this heritage committee looks at the investment of the museum collections, the cultural collections, our natural collections, and archival collections. And it holds our institution socially responsible for what they look after. And it's not just within a museum environment, it's everything that you see across the campus. Yeah. So I think more universities need to harness and leverage that power of bringing heritage more into their strategic and research plans, as they are committed to preserving and showcasing their heritage as well as that of South Africans. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Harris, briefly from you, 30 seconds. The clock is ticking.
Thanks, Prof. I'll be briefer. I think, in fact, we said harnessing heritage. How can we leverage the power of our diversity? And I would think that our diversity makes our heritage powerful. And that's the way we need to look at it. We need to embrace it, and we need to take it forward, and we need to preserve it. Just a very brief, with my other hat, the archives, we must, in that archive, embrace all of these diverse heritages so that we've got them for the future and can reflect on them in days going forward. We've got the COVID now, but in 1918 we had the Spanish flu. And how did people respond in their different cultural zones to these pandemics, to these issues? And we've done as much with the photographic competition we had with our students to get the insight into how people were coping. So there we go. We embrace everything to give us the power.
Prof. Ntuli, I know this is a passion of yours. I'm only, unfortunately, Prof, giving you 20 seconds. Let's see what you can say.
Currently, I have a virtual exhibition of 45, bones, and those bones are done with beads. And those bones, each one of them has got a poem. 33 of those bones were given to some of our most creative people. Sibongile Kumalo, Simpiwe, Dana, Yvonne Chagachaga, Homi, Baba, Guki, Watiyongo, and all of them to respond, to each of these bones with a poem, with a song, or what have you. We have just been harnessing the diversity of our people in order to focus during this time of the pandemic.
Thank you. And I give our young colleague, the Reverend Sibanyoni, the final 30 seconds.
Thank you, Prof. I think as South Africans, but more as Africans, we have so much to learn about ourselves, and we have so much to offer to the world. where we're still healing from the ills of the empire of slavery. Heritage Day is not just an option, it's a necessity to shake the memory banks of where we come from, you know, so that we can rise even stronger. I think Heritage Day at its definition is for us to sit together without any class, bringing everybody together and
Well,
learning
that's a
from one
fantastic
another.
way to end, but my job is not complete. Well, obviously, I thank each one of you as panel members for your excellent inputs, etc. And I think there's some fantastic feedback coming in from the alumni, you know, indicating that this is a rich conversation that we need to continue. But let me, before I say goodbye, I need to wrap up. But, you know, thank you to the alumni for the feedback to our 2 poll questions. We have one final question coming up. But just to give you some results there, the first poll question is, would you like to be notified about more UP alumni events in the future? We had a 97% of our audience saying yes. And I think that is indicative or testimony about the interest in the stuff that UP is doing. The second question, do you think it is important for people to make a concerted effort to preserve their culture and heritage? Wait for it, 100% of our participants tonight said yes. So that says something that how important these issues are. So, you know, panelists, thank you very much for your attendance. And let me just also remind our audience that the next LeadUP alumni virtual chat will take place on Wednesday, the 14th of October. And the topic, Be Curious, is very interesting. It's titled Celebrating Bosses Day by Putting Your Employees First and Committing to a Work Environment that is free of bullying and intimidation. I'm sure many of you out there have good experiences of this, and I'm sure it's going to be proof of a very heated, interesting conversation. As I indicated at the outset, the event today is brought to you by the University of Pretoria's Alumni Relations team. We really are interested to hear your opinions on the event and whether you found it informative and helpful. So please complete the final poll for the day on Slido, and that might come up on the screen. And that is, how likely are you to refer this LeadUP event to business colleagues and other alumni, with 1 being very unlikely and 10 being extremely likely? I think by all accounts, there has been a really positive response from alumni tonight and some great questions. I want to thank you all and our alumni in particular, and have a great evening. And I would like to ask the panelists to please remain behind in the broadcast studio. Thank you, everyone.